This is the portfolio that I took to interviews during when I was applying for undergraduate architecture courses. It's changed for each university. I changed the portfolio, and it's been 3 years. So this isn't the complete portfolio, but it's what I could salvage after all this time. So this is the first page. This was a project about women, and there's a lot going on in 2017 about women. I mean, there still is, so it's still a pertinent subject. And I was using different materials such as charcoal, oil paint, watercolor, 3D media, like I used glue gun there, to represent emotion, experiences, layered emotions and expressions through mark making and the experimental use of that media. Here I used watercolor, and this is like a test piece in which I was using ink and watercolor and trying to see different ways of using those techniques, and I then used that on this portrait of like this woman looking quite melancholy. And the reason they liked these 2 pages was it shows different skills. It shows, a range of different techniques and media used, but it also shows that I'm engaged in thinking and I have a sense of agency and I'm interested in pertinent topical issues. This project was about streets, and I was trying to capture the Junius loci, which is the character of a place, of different streets. So there's a market, which I used collage and bright colours and pens for, and then I tried to describe an East London street, and it's a bit more grubby, with multimedia used there and a lot of charcoal used as well. So I was experimenting with mark making, colour, and media to describe a sense of place and not just what I was seeing. So I helped out for open house, you can see me there. And while I was at the top of the gherkin helping out, I took photographs and made sketches, and I like the one on the left even more because I was trying to capture the way London looks like from the top. There's a lot going on, there's a lot of movement, a lot of busyness, and a lot of chaos, but it kind of has a rhythm and a beauty to it. And so that's what the scribbles, or the charcoal's about, the mark making's about. Using that starting point, this project continued to look at transformation, transition, movement, and change. So I looked at a photographer called Idris Khan, who I highly recommend. He's really, really good. He did a series in which he took photographs of the same object over and over again and layered them, and what happened is the final image looked like it was less off the object than what he began with. It kind of detracted from the object, and I took photographs of while I was standing on Stratford Station looking out at Westfield, and as I layered them on Photoshop I realised that it kind of looked a bit like scaffolding the image on Photoshop, and I painted from that, kind of taking some liberties while I was painting, and I really liked the fact that it sort of communicated this sense of transformation, and it communicated the journey that this sort of whole construction took before it became Westfield. So continuing with that idea of transition and layering, I decided to take 2 moments in which were both transitions, and they were actually emotional transitional moments in my life as well. So this is a 20-minute bus journey, and this is a 10-minute journey on foot. During the bus journey, I was sort of thinking about my future beyond my A levels, and in the journey on foot, that's a particular roundabout that I walked around almost every day, or quite often, to get to school, and that represents the entire A level period being a transition period in life between school and university. And so while doing these paintings, I was capturing the intangible. Those intangible journeys in one single frame, essentially, by layering those photographs. What the interviewer I think liked about this series was you being able to look at precedents and look at different artists. Like I looked at a lot of classical painters and classical paintings when I was doing that. So I started looking at buildings, and I made a series of tiny ceramic buildings, and I painted from those. And it was quite a quirky building. It was based on an artist called Veng Kang, so I used oil paint in quite a quirky way, and then I used plasticine that you kind of children make stuff out of to draw from those models that I made. So this showed my 3D model making skills, but it also showed that I had a bit of personality and character, and I wasn't too precious in my work, because I was willing to experiment and be creative and look at using media in ways that it's not necessarily intended to, but it works great. So continuing to look at the experiential quality of a space, I saw an artist who did this beautiful watercolour on the internet, and I decided to translate that into an oil paint. So this is my painting, but I did it in oil because that's my favourite medium. And what I liked was, it's a room, but you don't really see, the most important things aren't the objects in the room. You don't really see many lines. You see the colours, and to me the colours kind of represented the intangible elements of a space, which is like the memories, the sounds, the feelings, the smells, the histories, and that's something I wanted to explore further in this project. I also really liked the way that I did these experiments on the right, where I put different colours and different textures next to each other, and they kind of looked like a landscape. For some reason I was drawn to certain compositions, and I wanted to figure out why we have these intrinsic connections to certain colours, certain compositions, certain textures put into a certain way. Why do we think it's a landscape, even though there's really nothing, there's no lines, there's nothing distinguishable, but it's still really alluring. So continuing from that starting point, I made a massive sectional ceramic model, massive sectional model out of clay. It was a derelict building, a photograph I found on the newspaper at the time. There's a lot going on in Syria. So it was a derelict building in Syria, and the project was about property. So what I did was I took dramatic photographs of it with lighting and some interesting placements, and then I photoshopped it so it looks like war photography. And I was exploring the idea of property and what happens when, property goes hand in hand with class and wealth. So what happens when that's broken down and you lose everything? Who are you then? What happens to your identity? So in this painting, I over superimposed one of my photographs onto a photograph of just a residential London home, the residential London building, and the style of painting that I used to depict the London residential was sort of a realist, a sense. There's a sense of realism there, whereas the approach that I took for the derelict building inside was a bit more, a bit softer. There's more of a sense of fantasy. And the project was really about property and what happens to your life when everything's gone. So it was quite layered. I don't remember the exact layerings of that, but it shows different skills. It shows 3D skills, Photoshop skills, painting skills, photography skills, and the fact that I was responding to something that was very topical and pertinent. So in my foundation, I was using the human body as a way to understand space better, kind of a bit like Vitruvius, so inspired by the way Vitruvius was using the human body. So I'd recommend doing something like this, where you're taking something as basic as paper straws, but I created quite a robust, strong structure, and it forced my models to experience the space in a different way. Similarly, I was inspired by the form from the Spinnaker Tower in Portsmouth, and I created this like neck brace that forced my models to sort of look up as they were experiencing a space and not look. So we usually look ahead, we look straight ahead, but this time, how does your experience of a space change when you're constantly looking up? So these are really fun projects that help me understand space and how we experience space better. And I also used metal wielding. Here I used a bronze casting method to make these rings, which was really fun, and a different material again. So here I took rubbings and like conceptual drawings of a site in Cramley. I think it's Cramley Park in King's Cross. It's the first time I ever did that on my art foundation. So yeah, there's collage at the bottom, and these squiggles are like the kind of, I think they were to represent the nature and the very raw forms that I saw there. So then I used the glass wielding workshop, or I think it was plastic wielding workshop, to represent those forms. So you can see like some of those shapes reappear in here. And what the interviews liked was, again, it's another medium being used, but also it's photographed in a very interesting way. So it's not the most interesting model in the world, but it's photographed really well. So we did this really cool exercise where you dip things into plaster and then you hang them with strings so that you have this thing called a catenary model. So I decided to use a hair donor, and I really liked the sort of perforated form that was created, and I tried to replicate that using small pieces of card as a starting point for the form of my design, which was an interesting exercise, and it's something that you can easily do at home. So I would recommend doing that. Look up someone called look up Gaudi. He did that a lot. So this model actually creates really beautiful shadows, and that's something I figured out unintentionally. So I did a page on that, and I explored the use of light in my project. I also used Photoshop for that. So this is the final. I used plaster, the metal wielding workshop, and the catenary model to create the form of my pavilion. So this is still in the art foundation. And then I created a visualization, my first ever visualization ever. So this is an important page because you need to show your extracurricular activities outside of your studies. So I took part in the Finsbury Young People's Leisure Centre design competition, which we were featured on the cover of, no, we were featured in Architects Journal at 16, 17. So our team won this competition, and this was our entry board, and those are my teammates. So that was a really interesting conversation starter, and I took part in Accelerate into University with Open City, which I learned a lot from there as well.